Welcome to Tower Talk Business Radio, where we bring you conversations with the top business minds on Long Island and around the nation every week. Featuring expert consultants and small business owners who have found success but are also willing to share their top tips, failures, and give gritty, matter-of-fact advice based on their firsthand experience. Now, let's get down to business on Tower Talk Business Radio on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello and welcome to Tower Talk Business Radio. My name is Ray Schwetz, AVP of Business Banking at Jovia Financial Credit Union, along with Tanisha Boston Hill, CEO, keeper of the brand, marketing and digital agency.
We're focused on being the premier resource for business and entrepreneurship. We bring you weekly business advice, tips, tools, and services that help you grow your business. Plus, we interview some of the top business leaders in the industry, I may say.
Yes, and today we're speaking with Jennifer Fink. She's the Vice President of Sales at Lutech Industries. Now, Lutech is a company that manufactures and sells ergonomic, long-lasting medical equipment. Jennifer is a very cool person with some very cool stories, so I'm very excited to have her here. So, Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. I'm really, really excited to be here.
Yeah, so tell us about yourself. Are you a Long Islander?
I am. I'm from Suffolk County, grew up in Suffolk. I live in Suffolk now. I love living on Long Island. I love to paddleboard, so I love the water, being by the water, of course. And I love it here. Happy to be here, work here, live here, and we'll probably stay here.
Okay. You like to travel as well?
I do. I get very fortunate. I get to travel for work a lot. So I've had the opportunity to see about 20 countries. I never would have been able to do that on my own. So that's awesome. Yeah, I love to travel. And now that COVID's kind of like winding down, really looking forward to getting back to that.
Yes, absolutely. So best of both worlds, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And how did you find yourself at Lutech?
Sure. So I had every intention of becoming a high school history teacher. So after I graduated high school, I went to school in Manhattan. I went to Hunter College and I moved to Brooklyn. And I graduated with a degree in history with a minor in English and was going to do a program like Teach NYC. So after I graduated, I was working at a restaurant and I ended up moving up to a management position and then just kind of stayed there instead of going back to school. And then that kind of led me into my first sales job, working for State Farm. And I loved that. That was kind of totally different, right, than a history teacher. But I loved it and I loved building the relationships. So kind of grew there, moved to Allstate. And then at some point was looking for a career change and ended up interviewing at Lutech. And the CEO of Lutech is this amazing woman, Leanna Bakula. And immediately I interviewed with her and I was like, this is the place to be. She was just young. She had just inherited the company from her father and she had these dreams of bringing innovative medical technology to the market. And I don't know, I loved it. I loved the idea of traveling and her vision and the idea of doing impactful work. And so here I am almost 8 years later.
Wow. Now, you mentioned travel a couple of times. What are some of the countries? You said 20. Like, what is some of the countries you've been to?
Yeah, like Australia, New Zealand, United Arab Emirates. I've been to the UK, France a couple times. I've been to Belize. It's just really, really awesome places. And, usually for work, but I really try to I'm big into hot yoga. So my goal is to take a hot yoga class everywhere I go, some different language or, some foreign situation. And it's usually pretty fun. I usually have a little bit of downtime. So I definitely feel fortunate that I get to do that.
Nice. It's ironic. I was at the UN yesterday on a panel for info poverty.
What's
it's just talking about the digital divide, of all these countries. And so hearing you just not only speak about hot yoga in those countries, but just, all the medical needs across the world is, I'm sure, a major challenge for some countries.
Yeah.
Huge. Yeah, that's pretty funny that was just yesterday for you. I think that digital divide, that definitely speaks to kind of my industry and the innovation that Lutech offers, and part of the work that we're trying to do now. So that fits right in.
Tell us a little bit about some of the work that you do there. What's the layperson going to think of Lutech?
Sure. So basically, we design and manufacture medical equipment. Our main product is called the colposcope, and it's the device that's used to detect cervical cancer. It's also used in forensic medical exams after a sexual assault, to capture evidence that can be used in trial. So, so our devices are different than what colposcopes used to look like. For years previous, colposcopes were just these large, immobile microscopes that kind of stayed in a room and weren't really mobile. And they kind of a long process to use. If you think of a microscope, it has eyepieces, and the provider needed to lean in towards the patient. So it was kind of an invasive experience. And then in the late 80s, if you think like TV, home movie kind of camera, there was a company that used that technology to create a new kind of colposcope, a digital colposcope. But because the optics weren't really there yet, it didn't take off. And then in 2017, Lutech became the first company with FDA approval for a high definition colposcope. So it now used the latest technology, like what we're used to with cell phone camera technology, that kind of level, and use that technology in a colposcope. So now the device is mobile, it's compact, it can be taken all over the world, and it's much less invasive for the patient, which is really important, right? Because I mean, Ray, you might not know, but as a woman, when you're at the gynecologist, it's a very heightened experience, especially when they're detecting cancer, right? They're doing an exam to look for cancer. So it's really important to kind of provide a more comfortable patient experience when they're feeling most vulnerable. So that's our number one product. That's really what our bread and butter is, bringing that innovative technology here in the US, and then now expanding it by modifying it into areas of the world that don't have access to this digital technology and all of the benefits that come with that, and expanding access to cervical cancer detection through mobility with the device.
As the products have evolved, I imagine that your role has also evolved. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So when I first started, my initial job was to launch the technology. So I traveled mostly within the US to different conferences, met with gynecologists and sexual assault nurse examiners, and introduced this new technology to them. And now my role has kind of expanded to more international work, where we're focusing more on bringing this technology to developing countries and building partnerships in countries everywhere for telehealth services that involve our colposcope, and then telesane services, which is kind of like telehealth. If you picture an emergency room in a hospital somewhere and someone's been sexually assaulted, they're going to go to that emergency room for an exam, but a specially trained provider is going to conduct that exam. So they're going to need to leave their home, travel to the hospital. And also in some places, we live in New York, so there's a hospital within like 10 minutes of us in any direction. But in a lot of other places, that's not the case. So telesane services use telehealth platforms to bring a provider from home into the ER and allow them to conduct the exam with a non-trained provider in person. And the exam experience is a lot smoother. The patient is, they're seen quicker. And the images are very clear, whereas before they were using kind of digital cameras that are kind of hard to use on an internal exam. So kind of internationally, we're helping to build programs like that all over the world where they can conduct exams quicker and then expand access through outreach in rural areas all over Africa and other developing areas of the world.
You are listening to Tara Talk Business Radio on the voice of National Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ray Schwetz, along with Denisha Boston Hill, and our guest today is Jennifer Fink, VP of Sales at Lutech Industries, a company that manufactures and sells ergonomic and long-lasting medical equipment. Who are your direct clients?
So here in the U.S., that would be gynecologists and nurse practitioners, child advocacy centers, SANE locations, emergency rooms, prosecutors' offices, and then larger universities, teaching universities. The Department of Justice awarded some grants to set up telesane programs. So we did a statewide program where there's one state in the U.S. now that's able to have mobile and ER telesane programs set up all throughout the state. Outside of the U.S. would be distribution partners that work with government agencies to build hospitals and supply new equipment. And then NGOs, like nonprofit organizations that are setting up new programs for cervical cancer detection and sexual assault.
Now, your work really saves lives. Do you have any stories you can share about how Lutech has made an impact nationally and internationally?
Yeah. So cervical cancer is the number one mortality causing cancer in women worldwide. The World Health Organization launched an initiative back in 2020 to eradicate cervical cancer. So it's a big deal. More than 300,000 women a year all over the world die from cervical cancer, which is 90% curable if it's detected within the first 10 to 15 years, which is just crazy to think about, right? Yeah. 90% curable in that amount of time. So it's a big deal and it's preventable. I've had the opportunity in my career to meet a lot of really great people who are doing impactful work with cervical cancer. And so one of those people is Marissa Fayer. She's the CEO of a nonprofit called Her Health EQ. And her goal with Her Health EQ is to facilitate the donation of medical equipment around the world in developing countries, specifically for women's health. So her goal is equity in healthcare for women. And she approached me, I think back in 2016, early in my career. She was working with a hospital in Jamaica that didn't have a colposcope. So they weren't able to do cervical cancer detection at all. And she asked us if we would donate a colposcope, which we did. And since then, more than 5,000 women have been screened with that colposcope for cervical cancer, which I think is amazing. Super proud to be a part of that. And then since the development of that, we've talked a little bit back in 2020 with Lutech developing a more mobile colposcope, how we see that there's an opportunity to donate those devices in developing countries. So she created this 10 for 10 program that we're working on now, where we've selected 10 countries and each of those 10 countries are going to receive 10 colposcopes so they can do things like establish a national mobile colposcopy program so that nurses can go out into villages and set up detection for cervical cancer. So those women don't have to pay to travel into the hospital, and maybe they're not receiving any kind of regular medical care. So that will provide access for them to be screened and hopefully cut down on that death rate significantly. So I'm really proud of this partnership. We actually just launched the first 10 of that project in Costa Rica. So I'm actually, just before Thanksgiving, I just got back from that. And that was really amazing to just be on the ground there and see. I mean, I've never had the opportunity to really walk through a public health facility in another country. So that was really eye-opening to see how different it is from what we're used to here in the US. And it was really exciting to see kind of how excited they are about this new technology that they wouldn't necessarily even be considering because it would be maybe out of their budget. And just, yeah, it was really inspiring to just be there and see how this concept has evolved and is now being deployed.
Now, with these other countries, I mean, it's new technologies to them. Do you help with them with the training with them?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So this project includes the shipping, the installation, the training, the after sale, after donation service, support on the ground. There's a distribution partner of ours who's trained, and they provide the hands-on support to them. So the idea behind the project is not to just fundraise to deploy. It's fundraise to deploy, but to allow it to be sustainable so that they can continue using this equipment. The lifespan of the equipment is 10, 15, 20 years, so it's something that they can continue using throughout. And the total goal of the project is to screen 450,000 women a year, every year total. So with the sustainability, it should be able to go on for many years.
Now, this is very new to me. How do you get the word out about what you do?
Oh, well, that, is the hard part, right? Well, besides talking to you guys, which thank you again for this opportunity, I think just kind of putting it out on social media and, connecting with cancer societies in each country, different foundations. In Costa Rica, we worked with the Anna Ross Foundation. In Ghana, for example, we're working with a hospital that has a training program. In Zambia, we're working with the Rotary International, and just other kind of fundraising events. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the hard part, is getting the word out, but it seems to be growing.
And now, what are some of the misconceptions about your work and everything that you're doing? I mean, is it more research, development, sales, just all of the above?
I think the biggest misconception that I can think of is when I initially started, because that company back in the late 80s and early 90s had released that digital colposcope that kind of wasn't up to par optically, there was resistance. There was heavy resistance. And in every avenue of life, change can be difficult. And resisted. And the same goes for the medical field sometimes. So I think the misconception is that digital colposcopes were not as good as optical colposcopes. And I think that has changed. And ironically, the push through COVID in the medical field to move to a more digital space, I think has really helped, because you can see the value in doing telehealth now, whereas before it was kind of just an idea. And I think it's a lot better received now. And I think also, the same thing applies with the mobile colposcope that we've created. Now it's, there's a little bit of a misconception that it can't be done that way, but mobile colposcopy is definitely attainable. And I think that that's going to be a big part of how we eradicate cervical cancer. Instead of having the patient come into the hospital or the clinic, I think going to them is going to really change how colposcopy is done and offer just a better exam experience that's more comfortable for the patient.
Now, I want to bring it back a little bit more intimate, because I feel like we've talked about such, all the big part of what you do, the big impact of what you do, right? I'd like to talk a little bit about, individually, about what a colposcopy is, why it's important, when should someone inquire about it, just for like the average person.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. So here in the US, most women go to see the gynecologist for their annual exam, and they get a pelvic exam. And during that process, they'll get what's called a pap smear. And basically the medical provider will take a sample of cells from their cervix and send it out to the lab. When they are testing it, they're looking for HPV or human papillomavirus, which you might have heard of, which is a virus that about, I think the statistic is like 80 to 85% of the population has. There's different strains of that virus that have been known to lead to cervical cancer. So when they find that from the pap smear, the next step is to do a colposcopy. And what the colposcopy procedure is a visualization of the cervix. So the doctor will insert a speculum and use a colposcope as a magnifying device to view the cervix. They'll apply some acetic acid, and that will help withdraw the blood vessels. So they'll be able to see more clearly the changes in color and texture on the cervix. And then once they see that, they use the device to magnify so they can get a better look. And then they'll biopsy. And once the biopsy comes back, they'll determine what grade it is and what their next steps are going to be. So it's not always a death sentence. And there are some things that can happen to, lifestyle changes that can improve the outcome. But for the most part, as long as it's detected and treated early, then it has a positive outcome.
You are listening to Tower Talk Business Radio. Our guest today is Jennifer Fink, VP of Sales at Lutech Industries, a company that manufactures and sells ergonomics, long-lasting medical equipment. My name is Danisha Boston Hill, along with Ray Sweats on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Now, Jennifer, I thank you so much for just sharing about philosophies. And I know Ray is just he has no idea about this little pap smear experience that women have.
Well, I've been to my share of appointments, but I generally wait in the waiting room.
You should wait.
So I'm in a house full of women. So it's, but that's where it
absolutely
ends. Yes.
But I wanted to just step back a little bit when I hear, capturing viral evidence after a sexual assault. That in itself is so important. And that work is really, has really changed a lot throughout the years as they're capturing the evidence. Now DNA is being, DNA systems are actually connecting and finding criminals that have attacked so many women out there. How do you see, how does, Lutech and the equipment that you're using pushing that process forward? And is there a correlation with the speed of the equipment and then so many evidence rooms having, evidence just sitting there? Like, are you working together in tandem? Can you share a little bit about that whole process?
Sure. I thank you for that. It's a huge, huge part of what we do and something that we're really proud of. So, during an exam after an assault, there's a process like we see on TV where there's pictures that are taken and evidence that's collected. And these programs are highly underfunded. So they kind of always, the theme is kind of making do with what you have. So in the past, the way that they've captured those images, and especially internal images, so bruising, kind of laceration after an assault, is with a digital camera. And digital cameras are great when you're trying to capture like landscape or portraits, things like that. But for an internal exam, there's a lot that goes into that. So a lot of maneuvering. And so sometimes using a digital camera can be difficult to capture very clear images. And, images at trial are very important. The other part of using a digital camera is that with a lot of child exams, a lot of child assault situations, there's digital pornography that's involved. And so there's a big push in that exam space to do what's called trauma-informed care or trauma-informed exams. And what that means is kind of keeping the trauma of the incident at the forefront of the exam, keeping the patient comfortable, and doing things to avoid re-traumatization. So kind of not using a camera because that might make the patient more uncomfortable. So that's one of the benefits of our device. And I think, to speak to your question, there's a lot of work that's being done. I spoke about the Department of Justice grant to set up telesane programs. That's huge. There's an amazing program that we worked on with Norton Children's Hospital in Kentucky. Kentucky was number one for child assault for many years. And the healthcare providers there are doing some really amazing work. I've had the opportunity to be involved in a program with a system called Respond Clinical, and they do kind of recording and data capture. And an awesome ER nurse there came up with the idea to use Respond's choreography recording, is what it's called, system, in conjunction with our colposcope to set up a real-time database to track incidents. So basically they can there's like a body map, and they collect all of this data, use our colposcope to capture images and put that on the body map. And then a provider can go into that system and kind of search 13-year-olds, blonde-haired, blue-eyed female or something like that, and see what statistically has been happening with that demographic. It's this amazing system. So I think there's a lot of work in that space to kind of move things forward. There's a lot more funding that's happening, and just, talk about passionate, the people, the women that work in that space, they're just so incredible. The things that they see on a daily basis and the ideas that they have to improve patient care and to move things forward. It's just incredible. So those are some of the things that we've been able to do. But I think the major benefit of our colposcope is just ease of use. There's not a lot that goes into capturing a clear image with our device. And so it makes their job so much easier. And we talked about it before. It's a much less invasive exam for the patient. So the provider is able to kind of assess what's going on with the patient at the same time and offer them, reassurance and guidance throughout the process, and make it easier and just faster and, better evidence collection for them.
How can our listeners get in touch with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Jennifer Fink. We're also on Facebook and Instagram, Lutech Medical. And then Her Health EQ, so it's Her Health EQ as in equality.org as well.
We'd like to thank our guest, Jennifer Fink, VP of Sales at Lutech Industries, a company that manufactures and sells ergonomic and long-lasting medical equipment.
And I also just want to say thank you to both of you for giving me this opportunity to speak.
I'll leave you with DB's philosophy. Advancements in women's health is the key to living well and living longer.
We want to thank you for being with us. My name is Ray Schwetz, along with Denisha Boston Hill, your co-hosts and producers. Visit nccradio.org for more information. We're available on Odyssey, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, as a podcast on iTunes, Android Podcasts, and Spreaker. This has been Tower Talk Business Radio, powered by the voice of Nash Community College, 90.3 WHPC.